they all made either the high school team or this 9th grade team, and I didn't. At the end of the day, I was told I could be a practice player.
Welcome to Hello Grow,
the #1 growth podcast of Utah.
I'm Court Brady.
I'm Carlos Souza.
And today we have Justin Hewett with us. Pumped to have you.
Hey, I'm thrilled to be here. Hi, everybody.
Quick intro for Justin. So Justin cut his teeth in the world of sales doing door-to-door in college. And then you had a couple other jobs and then ended up for over a decade at Imagine Learning, where you grew to the head of all revenue. And you took a leap of faith 3 years ago to go and start Flashlight, which is also in the ed tech space. And you guys have grown rapidly to doing multiple millions of dollars of ARR in just a short amount of time. And you've done it with no venture capital. Is that right?
Yeah, we do have some funding. We call it practical funding.
Okay.
But we've not taken in any institutional investors, no VC groups, nothing like that. Yeah.
Cool. And that's what we're going to go through there. So we're going to talk about your entrepreneurial journey, and then we're going to talk specifically towards how to start and scale a SaaS company without institutional funding. On top of all your career successes, you have a beautiful wife, 5 beautiful children, 6. Just keep having more. 6 beautiful. Don't let Courtney listen to this. I think we're going to have one more and cut it at 4.
Keep going. Keep going.
But 6 beautiful children, all athletes, dancers, baseball players, basketball players. You got some kids that are going to be playing on Sundays in the NFL or on the basketball court. So really just pumped to have you.
We just want them to be able to play in high school.
Yeah, I'm sure
they can play in high school.
I'm sure they'll manage that. So let's just start off with the hard question. How did you have the courage? You have a family. You're in between like 3 and 6 kids at this point. And you have a home, a family. You have over a decade at a company. It's during COVID, and you decide, hey, I'm out. I'm going to go do my own thing. So could you give us the background, what made you make the decision, and how those first couple months after exiting Imagine?
Before you answer that question, we need to, I just remembered this. 2 years ago, we were having lunch with you, and you asked the question, have you guys thought about doing a podcast? You probably don't remember that, but it was the first time that I ever thought about it. And here we are today, so thank you.
I love it. Thank
you.
This is all thanks to you.
It all comes back. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Full circle.
Thanks for mentioning that, Carlos. I didn't necessarily remember that, but I love what you guys are doing here with Hello Grow, and I loved going through and listening to some of the interviews myself, and Clint Berry's a good friend of mine, and I know of yours, but it's fun to hear his story. He's a really remarkable person, and loved hearing Rich Wood's story and talking about the M&A and going from management consulting and all that stuff, Fortune 50 company, and then working with his dad in the steel company and growing it through M&A. I think there's a lot of really good stuff there, and I love what you guys are doing. So this is really cool.
Thank you.
Court, I have no idea why I thought it was a good idea to leave. Here's what I'll tell you. There's a little more to the story. So the way that you kind of did my intro is it sounded like I left Imagine Learning to go and start what is now Flashlight Learning. Couldn't be further from the truth. Long story short, and we can dive into this as much as you guys want.
We want
to,
the long version. We want to know the good, the bad, the ugly, the pain, and then also the redemption on the other side.
Well, we could go deep with this, but I'll just tell you, when I was 22 years old, I was dating Rebecca, and I had gone out for a summer, and I had sold alarms door-to-door with a company called First Line Security, which doesn't exist anymore, and ended up having some success, to the point that I came home, and I bought myself an Audi A4, 1.8 liter turbo, 6-speed.
Let's go.
It was awesome. And I thought I was being conservative because everybody else at the time was buying, these huge old Hummers, and but got into recruiting and kind of went that route and ended up, Rebecca and I started dating, and I decided, there's no way I'm taking off for the summer. Like, someone else will, like I wasn't that confident yet that Rebecca was going to wait around for me. So anyway, so I recruited a team and then ended up not going out for the summer. And I just stuck around here and sold. But I had used a lot of the money that I had made the previous summer. I invested it in recruiting, guys to come and sell with me. So dinners and golf or whatever it might be, and, trying to look apart. And that summer, I had gotten to a point where I had enough money to pay my expensive car payment, because I didn't pay cash, of course, right? I financed it. I had enough money to either pay my car payment and car insurance, or I could pay off my credit card for the month. And it was a low point for sure. I remember sitting, I was here in Draper. I grew up here in Draper, and I was sitting on this sagebrush green carpet in my room, back for the summer. I had been living down in Provo, but I was back for the summer to be closer to Becca. And I had that decision to make. And I ended up paying my car payment and my car insurance. Then I paid the minimum on my credit card. And I made a promise to myself at that moment of a couple of different things. Number one, that was going to be the last time I ever paid interest on a credit card, which has been the case. But secondly, and most important, was I did not want to I didn't want to be in a position like that ever again. And not only that, but I had seen, I come from a family that we grew up, and the family, it felt like we were close and we had good relationships, but eventually, my parents, they always lived on a little more than they made. And those money stresses, I think, really impacted their relationship. And, my parents ended up divorcing a number of years later, not at that moment, but at that moment, our life had been turbulent in our family. And especially once kind of the deck of cards fell, as it always does, right? And so my family ended in, that I grew up in, ended in bankruptcy and divorce and just shattered relationships. And I attributed a lot of that, whether right or wrong, to the instability we had on the financial side. So because of this, and then I'm experiencing it myself as a 21-year-old. I think I was actually 22, and that I made a commitment that even though I felt like I was entrepreneurial, I was never I would not put my family at risk to go be an entrepreneur. I was going to make sure I was committed to getting myself to a point where I had more investment income coming in than my family lived on, so that we didn't have to have a W-2. So we'll cut out the middle part of when all of that actually transpired, but we had gotten to that point. Rebecca and I had worked so hard and, really lived as frugal as we could. And so when we got to this point with Imagine Learning, we were there. We had more investment income coming in than we were living off of. We had gotten ourselves to that point. And so, I'd been promoted to the EVP of sales and was really working hard to bring back our culture. We had been acquired by a private equity group. And Imagine Learning at the time, I think we had 100 and something sales reps across the nation. But our culture was changing. It was getting away from, really the mission. I love being mission-driven in the work that I do. And I loved being mission-driven in that work specifically, because we were serving kids that were learning English as a second language. We were serving kids that come from low-income households. I am a sucker for the underdog. I love, showing up for the underdog. What can I do to help these kids, right? And anyway, so, that was the mission. And as the private equity firm came in, after a few years, it had really impacted our culture, that it became more about the bottom line, and it became more about, just process and, some of those types of things. And so when I got put into the EVP of sales role, I was really working hard to bring back that kind of the founding culture that we had of, Sue Prater, who was the founder of Imagine Learning. She was one of the 5 founders, but, she would talk about the 4 H's, and we've adopted that actually at Flashlight, which is the we hired for head, hands, heart, humility, and then at Flashlight we added happiness, a fifth. And so what we were trying to get back to that. I was trying to get back to that, type of culture. I was calling it the Imagine Learning way, and we had to I had to hire a bunch of new leadership, and so I'd worked really hard to like put this team back in place, and then COVID hit, and school districts were scrambling, trying to figure out like, what are we going to do? How are we going to educate our students? How's this going to work? At my house, I was on Zooms from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., right? And we had 5 kids at the time, 7 and under. My wife, Rebecca's trying to homeschool kids.
Why I messed up the number of kids.
But it was just hard. And one of them was a newborn. It was like, she was born in December. So she was like 3 months old, right? And we're scrambling. There's lots of pressure and whatnot. But we were figuring it out. We had a lot of confidence that we'd be able to figure it out, make a difference for our districts. And so about a month into COVID, middle of April, Rebecca is like, Jess, can we just like go down to St. George for a minute? You remember here in Utah, it wasn't like quite as crazy it was in some other parts of the country or in the world. And so she was like, let's go down, her family has a little condo down in St. George. Let's go down to St. George and kind of hang out for a little bit. So we went down, and I talked to our CEO. I hadn't taken any vacation since I'd moved into that EVP of sales role because I was just working so hard. And I just said, hey, we're going to take a few days off if that's all right. And ultimately at the end of the day, I got a text halfway through our little vacation from the CEO of the private equity firm that said, is it true that you are on a family vacation in the midst of this enormous worldwide crisis? Whoa, right? Shots fired. I was on a walk with Juliet, my fifth, strapped to me in a Bjorn, walking, like couldn't have been more peaceful. Like I was getting so re-energized. And when that text came through, it was like, what? I felt so marginalized. I felt so discounted, right? And so I text back. I said, yes.
That one word, that was it?
Mm-hmm. And then he texted back and it said something about how, unemployment's going to hit 20-something% and blah, 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 blah. And which was a threat. If you knew him.
Fear-driven text.
Totally, 100%. Anyways, the next day I got on a call with our East team. There's 60 reps on there. I'm energized now. I'm back. I called our CEO, but he didn't pick up. So I was just like, okay, I'm just going to let it go, whatever, And anyways, get on with our East team. And then at the end of that call, I'm pumped. Like I'm energized, like feeling great about everything. And then I hung up on that and got a Zoom call in. I didn't even know you could do that back then. I don't even know how to do that now. But our CEO called into me. And he and I were good friends. Like we had gone back, a long ways. And anyways, he started off the call and said, Just, I'm not looking forward to this conversation. Anyways, it's really interesting. I had this calmness, though, that settled upon me. And it was like I was in the Matrix and I saw everything happen in a slow motion. It was a really interesting moment. And ultimately what he got to, long story short, is he said, hey, Jess, so ultimately you have one of 3 decisions to make. Number 1, you recommit and do this job the way we want you to do it, which I had only taken it because they said that I could do it the way that I wanted to do it, which was I was going to try and bring back that culture. 2, or B, it was letters, not numbers. B, you can go back to managing California, which is what I had done previously. Or C, we can enter into a separation agreement. Dude, I've been here for 11 years. Like, I feel like I've been a big part of building this business and this culture. And wow, that escalated quickly. Okay, thank you. This was about 10 o'clock in the morning. He's like, all right. He's like, well, if you could let us know what you decide by noon, that'd be great. So I head out, talk with Rebecca for a little bit. And, she's like, well, what are you going to do? And I felt so much peace around option C. So previously, about a week and a half prior to this, I had fasted, and I just didn't feel like I was supposed to be at Imagine anymore. I felt like the time had come, and felt like I had received an answer that it was indeed time for me to leave. So it's really ironic that all this happened, right? Is it ironic? Is it a coincidence? I don't think so. And so I walk back into that Zoom at noon, and I say, well, I'm going to choose option C. And his face went white.
Was not expecting that.
He was not expecting that at all. And, I just said, you guys have made it pretty clear that, option A would be pretty miserable. And option B feels a little bit like a slap in the face, even though I loved my team. So I'll choose option C. His face goes white. He's like, okay, well, we'll figure it out. Like, we got some things to do, and then we'll be back in touch. It's like, all right. And so the CEO of the private equity firm reaches out to me, and we end up spending like 6 hours on a Zoom over the next like 3 or 4 days. And he's trying to talk me out of it. He's like, just don't let our mistake lead to, compound into your mistake. We were wrong. We shouldn't come at you. Da, 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 da. But ultimately, they were trying to push me into a corner. I called their bluff. And the only reason I felt comfortable to do that was obviously because of, the work that Rebecca and I had done to, lay a financial foundation for our family. So I left. I didn't know what I was going to do. So there's your long story shorter, maybe. Like, we cut out 10 years, but it was still kind of long.
It's a great story.
Wow. I have a couple. We generally don't dive into the spiritual aspect of this, but there are a couple. I mean, you brought up some spiritual things. Can I touch on those for a second?
Please, yeah.
There's two. One that I've struggled with, and I'd really like your take on it. So the story that you told your parents is, you could have been telling my story. Very similar. Financial struggles ended in divorce. And this drive of, I will never, ever allow finances to dictate my life.
That's right.
And it got to this point where I had this epiphany that I was viewing money as my God. In the silo of, it will protect me, it will help protect my marriage, it will help me avoid hardship, it will sustain me. Mm-hmm. All of those things, which I think maybe is just pushing the pendulum too far, is just pushing that pendulum far. So could you touch on that for a second, of how far do you push that desire to get that financial freedom? Because you brought up that you were only able to make that decision because you have passive income. You're out of the rat race right at that point. So how far do you push it before you let money become your God?
It's interesting. I never thought of it that way as I was going along.
I'd love to hear how you thought of it.
I think the reason is just because for me, I had a purpose as to why, right? I think the why matters, right? If it's about, self-aggrandizement, you're trying to become, this person that people revere and look up to, and I want to have this money so I can drive this. Dude, I drive a Toyota RAV4. Like, I don't care about my car, right? Like,
we should have had you on the podcast before you cut your hair.
Yeah, you totally should have. I was way cooler then. No, but I think, so for me, it was always about freedom. It was always about getting to a spot where we were going to be able to like have the time for our family, that I could invest in my family, invest in our relationships, take time off and run up to Bear Lake in the weekends during the summer, right? Do those types of things. And, and so to me, I think the why matters a lot. And I think if you put it in that perspective, the other reason was I always wanted to be an entrepreneur or an investor, and we did a lot of investing, but I never really allowed myself to take the chance to go build a business until I had gotten to that point, right, where we had kind of crossed over. And so, but I think that, I think it all comes down to, you kind of mentioned, you were giving so much power to money, and I think at the end of the day, that happens a lot. like I think a lot of people approach it that way. I think for us, for Rebecca and me, the big thing for us was just the fact that like this was for our family. This was for our future. This is why we were doing it. It wasn't about, I guess to some degree it was about security, right? Like we wanted to make sure we were going to be able to take care of our family and make sure we were going to be able to do some of those things regardless of the ebbs and flows of a career or whatever it might be. But, you're a little bit of an extremist, Court. Like you take whatever it is and you go to the end. Like you are go to the polar extreme, right? And that may have something to do with it.
I try to get there as fast as possible so I can see what the poles look like.
That's right.
Next question is whether it's you call it the Spirit of God or the Holy Ghost or your spidey senses or your gut. How do people tap into that more often and make decisions from that perspective rather than a fear-based position, which I feel like most people often live in?
Oh man, these are hard questions. I don't know the answer. I just know for me, right? Like I just think that you have to get out of you have to take the first step. And I think the first step is getting beyond the point where you're running scared, right? Where I was on the sagebrush carpet of the bedroom in my parents' house, where I'm like, what bill am I going to pay, right? Like I think that's a real situation, and you got to get beyond that. And I think once you can get beyond that, I just think at that point you're able to be more, more sensitive, to the whisperings of the Holy Ghost or, from the Lord. And I think, as you start moving in that direction, I think the things that start to happen is you start to understand that, everything you have comes from Him. And so how do I honor that? How do I help Him do His work, right? Here on earth, how can I be a tool in His hand? That's the reason we started Flashlight. So 6 months after I had left Imagine, my good friend invited me to go golfing, and one of our friends was coming in from Dallas, Texas, and every time he'd come into town, we'd go golfing. There was 4 of us. One of those 4 was the previous CEO of Imagine Learning, the one who was there when I was the EVP of sales. He and I hadn't talked in the 6 months since I had left, but at that moment, so my one buddy who was organizing it texted me. He's like, "Hey, we need a 4th. Let's go golfing. Dave's coming to town. What, who should we invite?" And, which I thought was really kind of him to let me kind of dictate whether, this previous CEO came or not. And I said, well, let's invite him. Let's have him come. And he was surprised. He said that I had invited him. But anyways, through that, he and I ended up having a conversation. We rotated golf carts, so we'd hang out with everybody over the course of golf. And during the very last hole, he turns to me. He's like, "Just when are you going to start your ed tech company?" I'm like, "I'm not starting an ed tech company. Do you know how hard it is to get going? There's so much red tape, teachers unions, funding changes all the time. You get administrators that change, and all of a sudden you're kicked out of a district that you worked so hard to get in." I was like, no, thank you. And he said, "Well, Josh, you should." He's like, "You should." And I said, "Well, what should I go start?" And he said, "You should go start the same one, the business that you had talked about starting, which was an Imagine Learning type product and company, but for secondary students, for middle and high school. Because what we did at Imagine Learning was primarily for elementary." And when he said that, it's like lightning just struck me. And I knew that I had been kind of trying to figure out, what am I going to go do? What am I going to work on? I was kind of working on a book, and I was really enjoying being dad and whatnot. But I knew there was work for me to do. Anyways, when he said that, it was like lightning struck. I could not get to my car fast enough. Normally we go grab a soda, grab some sandwiches or something. But I got in my car and called somebody I had worked with previously. And I just said, "Hey, Emma, this is what we need to do. We've got to go build a secondary version for English learners of Imagine Learning." And And she said, my daughter was here last night telling me the same thing. Right? It's like, boom. And so it was interesting. Like for us, the light part of flashlight is the Son of God. For me, I'm doing his work. Like that's my goal, is to get out there and go make a difference, shine a light on his children around the nation. And so, but I think that you have to get yourself to a point where he can use you and you can become that tool in his hand, right?
I love that. Justin, you did mention, you just mentioned this passion that you have for that, and you want to be a tool.
Not that kind of. I mean, there's different kinds of tools, right? Like I remember growing up, someone
in
called
God's
you a
hand.
tool. That wasn't a good
tool
thing.
in God's
Right.
hand. And then you did say early on, you said, "I am passionate." I'm paraphrasing, but you love the underdog. You have a passion for the underdog. Does that come from personal experiences? And you did mention the religious side of it, but where does that passion come from?
It probably comes from a couple of different places. But when I was in eighth grade, I had been playing basketball with the same group of guys. Maybe it was going into ninth grade, actually. I've been playing basketball with the same group of guys, kind of pretty competitive basketball. And they all made either the high school team or this ninth grade team, and I didn't. At the end of the day, I was told I could be a practice player. It's like, oh, man, gosh. Basketball was my life. Like, I moved around a bunch as a kid. And, whenever I started a new school, I didn't know anybody, didn't have any friends. But after that first recess, I had friends because I was good enough at basketball that I made new friends. Anyways, that was a really tough moment for me. And I realized, but I practiced. Every practice was like it was a game for me. And I played really hard, and I practiced a lot. The next year, I ended up making the sophomore basketball team at the high school, and a number of the boys that were on that ninth grade team didn't make it, especially the coach's son, who I felt like had taken my position. So it was one of those things where I think part of it's just competition, and I love sports, and I'm always cheering for the team that's losing, that I'm hoping comes back. I usually am not cheering for the front runners unless it's the Chiefs. We enjoy cheering for the Chiefs. And so I think that's probably where it comes from a little bit, and just understanding, to me, that's the American dream in many respects, right? Is like figuring out a way to rise up and win.
It sounds like you combined the knowledge that you had gained at Imagine Learning with a passion that you had growing up for the underdog, and combined both of them and turned into a business. We had someone on the podcast one day that said, don't start a business unless that thing is keeping you up at night. Unless you're so passionate about this idea that the world can't live without it, and it's keeping you up at night, then you go start a business. How important is the passion side, and would you recommend that someone only starts a business if they're passionate about that?
I think you should start the business if you have something unique to offer the world, right? If you can solve a problem that nobody else is solving, that the world wants solved. I think having passion matters, but you have people that are, I think the passion can come as you go as well, right? Like we're now serving about 125,000 English learning students around the nation. And when we get a study back from Johns Hopkins University that says that students who used flashlight twice, they should use it 25 times in a school year, but the kids that used it twice grew 25% more than kids who didn't use it at all. Wow. That's huge for us, right? Because there's a lot of kids that that are English learners who become long-term English learners, and they become classified as long-term English learners because they've been in our system for 7 years or more, and we have failed them. We have not exited them. We have not given them the resources that they need to get out of that, right? So for me, I can get really excited about that, because if we're serving kids and they're growing and we're building the relationship between the teacher and the student, you know what that kid's not going to do? He's not going to go drop out, right? And his world is expanding and his possibilities are expanding. And so, as far as going to start a business, I think you have to be really passionate about the people you're going to serve. You got to choose who you want to be a hero to, right? So you gotta pick who you want to go serve, and then figure out what problem they need solved. I think that's the way to approach it. And as you get going down that road, I bet it will keep you up at night, because you'll be thinking about all the different ideas, and you'll be passionate about solving that problem. But I don't think you have to be passionate about it out the gate necessarily. Were you passionate, Court, about like having people take pictures of their equipment?
So don't ask me that question. I'm still not passionate about it. I'm passionate about our people, the effect that we have in our employees' lives, but I have not generated passion for. I was passionate about what I could do with the money, the financial upside, and passionate about the people that I was working with.
I would bet you're also passionate about the efficiency that you provide these banks or these lenders, right? Yeah. And I think that there's things like around that you can develop passion that maybe, people talk about how, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life or whatever. It's like, whatever. Like, I love work. I do love work, but it is work, and you got to show up. And I think it's through work that all of the best things in life come to us.
One of the best pieces, I don't think you were trying to give me advice, but you said that, I don't know if we were talking about honesty or what it was in one of those walks around Draper Park. Mm-hmm. But you just said, when my kids ask me where I'm going in the morning, I say work, and they say, why? You say, because I love it. And I've been doing that, and it like...
Henry wants to go to work.
He wants to go to work so bad. Hadley wants to go. I was like, you got to get a little smarter. You got to put in a few more reps, and then you'll be ready. But like,
he wants a mouse and a keyboard for his Christmas gift.
I think so many entrepreneurs hide behind this guise of, I'm doing it for the family, or I'm doing it for this reason. Yeah. And that might be true in part, but I think it's a lie. And there comes a point where your financial situation is such that you actually aren't doing it for your family, but you're doing it because you love it. And I know what it was. You're saying, want what you want, Court. You're taking it from Ben Hardy. Mm-hmm. And that was such good advice for me to hear. I have one more question about Imagine Learning and like companies, and then I want to segue into how you got your first 10 customers. How did you delight them? How did you do it without institutional funds? The question is, I think there's a lot of companies that hit this 50, maybe even less than that, but 25, 50 employees all the way up to a couple hundred, who are recruiting and grooming entrepreneurs in their business. And they have this moment where that entrepreneur does something that is their trip down to St. George, or losing a bunch of money for the business on a risk that they took. How do companies position themselves to retain entrepreneurs and turn them into intrapreneurs versus repelling those people? Because you probably would have made way more money for Imagine Learning than even the ARR that you guys are at, because of the resource where you guys started, the baseline of where you guys were. So what advice would you give the founders?
Just in that first year, we went from 100 million to 125 million.
Wow.
Right. So you're right. Like, the reality is, if businesses can retain their top talent, that top talent will have a larger and larger impact, because you have more leverage through the business, right? So, I think the biggest thing is just giving people an opportunity to run and being okay with them learning and making mistakes, right? Like, my one of my best friends is also my COO. We work together. We actually sold together that first summer, and he's a fantastic human being. But we let go of a good friend of ours, a really close friend of mine, who was our head of sales. And my COO did it because he was he had been reporting to him now, and I was not in an emotional state to do it. Like, I wasn't ready. I didn't want to do it, but I knew we needed to do it. And so anyways, and the way that it was done was not very well done. We totally botched it. And when I think about my career, it's like one of the things that I totally regret the most, frankly. But he and I had a conversation after that. He's like, Just, I don't know how you want to approach this moving forward, or what you want to do.
This is the CEO.
This is my COO.
Or your head of sales.
This is my COO. And, I was disappointed in the way it went, but I was just as disappointed in myself as anything else, because I should have been owning that, not asked him to do it necessarily, even though he said, "Oh, I'm happy to do it." But the reality is that was a huge investment in him and in our partnership and our relationship, right? To be able to have given him the room to fail. And now, in many respects, he leads our company. And he is very people-centric. He always has been. And he made a mistake. He'd own up to that. Totally, 100%. Like, even today, we still talk about it. We're like, gosh, how did we screw that up so bad, right? And so I think, if you go back to that, building a company and you've got these entrepreneurial people and they're helping you build it and they're making a huge difference, you have to make sure that you continue to give them room to run. You've got to let them be color outside the lines a little bit. And it's okay if it makes it a little bit hard for some other people, because you know what? This person is going to provide so much extra value that if other people can't see that's a problem. You need to help them see it, right? So sometimes you get managers in place that are managing one of these really entrepreneurial people, and the manager is not entrepreneurial, right? And they just don't see it. They don't value it. They don't appreciate it as much. But the reality is all of progress is made through breaking stuff, right? So you've got to have this entrepreneurial person on your team that's willing to kind of push the boundary a little bit, really get close to the problem to understand it, so that then they can say, well, it's really stupid actually that we're doing it this way, because this way works way better. It's like, well, how do you know that works? Well, because I did it. You're not supposed to do that, right? Like, I mean, you can't micromanage these entrepreneurial folks, and you got to give them room to run. That would be my thought, Court.
Love that. Can we segue into how you build a $5, $6, $7, $8 million ARR company in 3 years without institutional funding? Walk us through, like, you leave the golf course, you call up that person you used to work with, you have some income coming in, but it's probably maybe as significantly more than your living expenses, and you're able to just self-fund. But tell us, like, how did you capitalize this? How did you get your first few customers? How did you get to 500,000 in ARR?
Yeah, so we didn't have like tons of extra coming in, for the record. I think that's important. We did have some savings, but it's not like we had, 2x or 3x what our monthly expenses were that was coming in from investment income. So once we decided we were going to start, this mother and her daughter, who was a PhD candidate, once we decided we wanted to work on this as a project, I tried to find someone who could be a technical co-founder. And it was in the middle of COVID, so it was a little bit harder. I went through my network, and I didn't really have anybody that I felt like I could pull in, that I could trust enough, to be honest. And that, frankly, I was not going to give up half the company or a third of the company or something like that to somebody that, I didn't have that kind of a relationship with yet. Now I have people that I would, and so I was just trying to figure it out and what to do, and eventually figured out that you could work with an agency. Eric from Lashbrook, Eric Laker. He told me about this agency, Tech9, worked with them, and they've been awesome. But we first got started, I actually met with a ton of different agencies and then zeroed in on this one because they gave me the most confidence. They were the most expensive too, but I had the most confidence coming out of there. And and so, I built my prototype in Google Slides. Actually, I did it on just a regular paper first. We just drew it, and then I loaded it up into Google Slides, and then we started dragging button, clever button, whatever it might be, different buttons, and drag, copy and paste it onto the Google Slides, and that was how we got started. That's how we started kind of building out the experience we wanted. And went and took that to the agency and showed it to them. And they're like, yeah, we can help you with this. I have to pare it down a little bit, and this is what we're going to do. And anyway, so I put $50,000 into development. And Rebecca and I committed it. We're like, hey, we can put $50,000 towards this. Let's do it. And so we got kind of a front end experience created, at that point. I'll pause for a second in case you want to double click on anything there, or I can keep going.
You, as you're going through this process, I just had this vision that you're driving an Audi A4 15 years ago, and now you're driving what you're driving now.
Yeah.
But the difference is you have $50,000 in the bank to be able to go and put into this. You gave up looking a certain way to be able to actually have something that was the foundation of what's now worth deca millions.
Oh, wow.
I just think that's like cool. Like,
cool,
if anyone that puts
Yeah.
any kind of multiple on a SaaS company and says it's worth, like, it's cool, really cool.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, that's really been our focus, you know. And we've had great, you know, Rebecca and I've had great examples of this. Like her grandparents, Grandpa Bob and Grandma Deanne Zarbach are just incredible people. They created a tremendous culture of like working hard, you know, saving your money. Yeah, spend it on something, but like invest it. Like they've done a lot of investing it, and now they're able to have a family reunion where they pay for everything and bring everybody, you know, together, right? Do some of those things. Her parents, hardest working people. Their first child was special needs, and in addition to that, I mean, David was a tremendous blessing to the family, but also, you know, in some respects, he was a burden as well and made things harder. And in it, you know, and so here, Lynn and Mary Jane are just getting started with their family. They are, you know, he's working his full-time job. And then in the evenings, you know, 3 nights a week, they'd go clean at a plumbing supply company. They'd be the janitors for the, you know, the overnight cleaning. And they did that for a lot of years. Like Rebecca and her siblings grew up going there, and like they'd have little jobs, and then they would know like all of the desks that had candy in them. And they knew that on like the Saturday shift there was going to be, or Friday night, that there was going to be donuts dropped off, and they got really good at like grabbing one and rearranging them. And so, but that was what she grew up with, right? Like she grew up with like working hard and being frugal. And you know, to this day, Lynn and Mary Jane have done well for themselves, but they've, you know, in many respects, like they were really good examples of being frugal and being good stewards of their funds. So
You just could have, I mean, you could have stayed on the trajectory of, you could have had the newest Audi at that point, but you chose to have the $50,000 in the bank to go and make the investment. More than that, I'm sure, but to make that investment. A lot of founders at this point have this decision of, am I going to bootstrap or am I going to go the VC route? What is the magnetism towards the VC route, and what are the red flags people should look for when they're going that direction? I wish we could have recorded some of our conversations when I was thinking about going the VC route with a tech startup, and some of the insights you gave me.
Yeah, you might need to remind me of some of these things and you know, of what's most valuable. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of people choose VC because it's cooler, right? It's driving the Audi A4 instead of driving the RAV4, right? I think that's a big part of it. Is no one's going to write an article about the guy that's bootstrapping his company, right? But they'll write an article about so-and-so raised $3 million from this, you know, VC group. And, you know, I think that's a big piece of it. And that's, to me, that's fake achievement. That's not real achievement, right? So, you know, the awards and whatnot that you can go win, or the, you know, the write-ups on stuff like that, I think, you know, that's not really solving the problem that you're trying to solve. And so I think that's part of it. And I think other people, you know, a lot of times people just don't really know. They don't realize that by bringing a venture capital person in, you know, firm into their company, they're automatically choosing that they are going to sell, and they're on a shot clock, because that VC group has LPs that they care a lot more about than the comfort of the entrepreneur, because those LPs are the ones paying them. Those are the LPs are the ones writing the checks that pay their management fee every month that VC is using to pay his mortgage at home, pay for his kids' soccer stuff, right? So if you follow the money, you know, the VCs have an obligation to get to an outcome. Those funds are typically 10-year funds. Depending on where you come in as an entrepreneur, if you're 5 years into their fund, you're going to feel a lot of pressure to grow fast real quick. And, you know, before anybody takes, you know, venture capital money, you should go read Power Law, because it'll help you understand if you have the type of business that should take VC money. And there are a lot of businesses that should take it. There's a heck of a lot more that should not, right? So, as we were sitting with it and we were trying to figure out what to do, I had gone through my Imagine Learning experience where when we made the transition, when we brought in an institutional investment group, this is pretty early on. This is like 2010, I think. When that group came in, things changed. Our founder, CEO, ended up being pushed out because they, through some different governance and some different things, they had gotten control of the board and control of the company. So the company she started, she's grown to, at this point, probably, $30 million in revenue, $25 million in revenue, ARR, right? At that point, she was pushed out and they moved to more of a professional executive, right? Who had big business experience, had done some of these things. And that only that's the other end of the stick. You pick up one end of the stick where you take, that kind of money, then you will eventually no longer be running your company or be able to make the decisions for your company. And so I knew that, and so that was why I chose that I wasn't going to take institutional, investment, and we took it from, Rebecca and I are the largest financial investors in our company, and then we've taken some, and I think 88%, I think, of our equity is held by people who are actively working in our business. So I think about half to 2/3 of the investment that has been put into Flashlight has come from people that are building it. So, and then we've done stock options and things like that vest over time. But so that's how we've approached it. I don't know if I necessarily help, but I think.
Would you do that same setup again, knowing what you know now?
I probably would have gone slower, actually. Part of the reason that I raised the money that I did raise was because Imagine Learning did a big layoff. And I looked at it as like, oh my gosh, this is an opportunity. I've got to go, right? Like I can get some of these great people. I mean, a lot of these people were like sales reps who were already at quota. Like who lays off sales reps that are at quota? Anyways, great people. And I just said to myself, like, hey, this is my opportunity. Like I had gotten my first 7 customers or whatever. We've proven this is going to work. Let's go. So we went and we hired them, and they came in, and I hired 6 sales reps to start.
Wait, from zero
all
to
at
6?
once?
From 0 to 6
Isn't that nuts?
in a month? In one.
What's the time
They
frame?
came in over about 6 weeks.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? So anyway, so like I probably would have gone a little slower, but we learned a lot. We learned a ton really fast because of that. We learned that some of these great AEs from a big name company really struggled to come in and sell in our company because we didn't have a name yet. We didn't even barely know what we were doing, right? The nice thing is we had the problem right, and we had a solution for it.
I want to hear about that. So prior to this tidal wave of sales reps, the 6 in 6 weeks, how did you get your first 5 or first 3 delighted customers?
Well, first thing I did is after I met with those 2 practitioner educators, who helped me really get it started. They once we had the product built, they decided they didn't want to do it anymore. So that's they were like, you've gotten me out of retirement twice. I just want to go back to being retired. And then the other one, she's working on her PhD, and she was like, I just need to work on this. I'm working on my dissertation. I think they didn't like the fact that like business, a lot of times when you're selling Flashlight or selling a product, you are it's the same conversation over and 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 over again. And the better you get at that conversation, the more things move. And they just didn't like having to have the same conversation over and over. They wanted to, anyway. So I thought that was interesting. But anyway, so when we first got started working on this and like trying to identify how we would build a product and a platform to build this, we ended up, we went out and interviewed, I think 15 or 16 of who we thought would be our buyers, the people that we thought would be our buyers. So we could just confirm, like, is this a problem we're solving? Like, would you pay to solve this problem? What if we and then we came back and we said, what if we solved it this way? Oh, well, that makes sense. Yeah. And so it was interesting. So we did all that work up front. And then what ended up happening is we got that first version built with the 50 grand. It had no back end, but it had a front end. And so I got to another moment actually where I didn't know if I should keep moving forward. I was reaching back out to all these ESL directors across the nation who had said that this was a problem we're solving. None of them were getting back to me.
Tell me about ESL. English
as a second language. That's right. And
none of them responded?
None of them were getting back to me.
Of these 14 people.
And they had previously said they would pay
They
for it.
had previously said this was a problem we're solving, we would pay for it. No one's getting back to me. Like not even hey, Just, I'm busy right now, I'll get back to you. Right? Nothing. I was just being ghosted left and right. I'm like, I was distraught. So one night, I said a prayer and I said, I just asked the Lord, I said, if this is the work that you want me to do, like, please point me in the right direction. Help me know that, like, we should continue down this path. The next morning, I got a call from my buddy. So this is probably at like 10 o'clock at night. The next morning at 10 o'clock or so, I got a call from my buddy. I was walking around the park because I dropped off my son to tumbling. And it didn't make sense to go all the way back home. So I was walking around while he was doing that. And then I was listening to an audiobook, which I love to do. And I got a call from my buddy who his first words were, Just, can I invest in your company? I was like, what? I don't even have a company yet. I don't even know if I have a product. I said, I'd love, he was a sales rep in the same space. And I said, well, why don't you introduce me to somebody that could potentially buy it, and we'll see what they think. And because I'm like, I got to get somebody to look at this, right? And we'll see what they think, and we can kind of go from there. He's like, all right. And he gave me, somebody's name and their number, and this person was a principal at this point. And so I immediately call this person, and I'm chatting with him, and he says, yeah, come on down. I'm on spring break right now, so why don't you come down today or tomorrow or something? Just show up whenever works for you. I'm like, well, I wanted to prepare for this meeting. I said, well, what if I come by tomorrow at 10 o'clock or whatever? And anyways, I ended up meeting with him. He's blown away. He's an innovator, right? Early adopter kind of person, like the exact perfect persona. I show him what I'm building, and he says, he's like, I thought we were meeting today to talk about the problem. He's like, you have the solution. This is it. This is what we need. At the end of the meeting, he even says, as he's walking me out of his school, he says, could I invest? It's like, what? I said, I think there might be like a problem with that, so we won't maybe go that direction. But it gave me so much confidence, like the confidence that I didn't have, the night before, 2 nights before. This person ended up being promoted weeks later to be over all of the English learners.
That principal?
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Over all the English learners in that district, and that district has a third of all the English learners in Utah. And it led to our largest partnership to date.
Wow.
Does that just happen? I don't think so. So anyways, that ended up being one of our first customers. He tried to be our first check, but I found somebody else first. He wasn't fast enough to get it through the machinations of a large district. And anyways, I went back and called some of my earliest customers out in Iowa and, showed them what we had. And they were like, Josh, this looks great. Let's do it. And they made some small purchases. Those were for agencies where they worked with like 25 school districts. So it was great because I was able to make one sale that got me into 8 or 10 school districts, right? So that was really helpful.
One thing that I think is interesting and atypical of entrepreneurs, but typical of successful ones, is that entrepreneurs, especially ones that are attracted to VC, the first thing they think is, I have an idea, I got to go get money.
That's right.
And your first thought was, who do I want to be a hero for?
Mm-hmm.
What problem are they suffering? What's a solution to that problem? How do I validate that? And then how do I get a couple of them delighted or stoked on it? And in that whole mix, you already had people wanting to give you money. So hold on, we got to check a few boxes first. But just the self-control and the discipline and the process of saying, no, I got to stick to the process. Like, we got to go through this. And it's easy, I think, for people to get distracted and say, yeah, let's get that check, because that's validation. The check from the investor is not validation. The customer paying you and being delighted and expanding with you, that's validation.
So well said.
I do have a question. Just so we've had multiple people, probably, I don't know, at least 5 people in the podcast that have said that they went down the same route. They interviewed potential customers, asked that question. If you had this solution, would you pay for it? And people said yes. In your case, those people didn't get back to you. Knowing what you know now, what would you do anything different? And if so, what would you have done differently about those interviews?
Yeah, I think I was a little naive when I was doing the interviews, and I just figured if I build it, they will come, right? And I think that ultimately there is so much to be said for understanding the technology adoption curve, right? In that first group, you have I think those are innovators, right? Is that what they usually call them? Early adopters? Yeah.
I think it's early adopters, right?
I'm trying to look for the crossing the chasm.
That's right. I don't think you have it in here. But I think that those early adopters, at the end of the day, they love the new technology. They want to experiment with something new. Like, they're energized by it. And I don't think I had a way. I don't even know how I would necessarily do this right now, but I would work to try and understand if these 15 ESL directors that I was speaking with, are they early adopters or not? Because if they're not early adopters, look, a lot of educators, like in our space, a lot of educators are definitely not early adopters. Like, there's a few of them, there definitely is, but a lot of them aren't, and in large part because, like, they like the stability, they're risk averse, some of that kind of stuff, right? And so I think that's the thing I probably would have done a little bit differently. Secondly, I probably would have sold myself more, right? Like, I got our first 7 or 8 customers, and then from there I kind of ended up handing over the direct sales process, right, to this group of 6 reps that came in, and I think that going through that forced, like, we learned a lot really fast, and we had a lot of different lines in the water that we were learning from and working through, and it was a really collaborative time where we would get together. We had sales meetings 2 or 3 times a week as a group that we would talk through, like, how this meeting went, and we'd dissect it and talk through it, and how are you identifying the problem? How are you doing some of that kind of stuff? And so it ended up being really helpful for us, but it was really expensive too at such an early stage that I think if I would have just sold maybe for another cycle, then maybe we could have learned more. But, I wouldn't actually change that, because I think momentum and like how quick you can get from point A to point B really matters. And we were able to go pretty fast because of that.
And thanks for the introduction to Greg Head, by the way. Mm-hmm. I've had a couple good conversations with him since you made that intro.
Are you going to go down to Phoenix?
No, I got to get this new company a little bigger.
Oh, okay.
First. Right. But one thing he said is, Court, you need to operate in the in-between, in the yes and yes, which is that you got to be convinced that your product is for everyone. And then you got to realize that there's only a few people that your product is for. So you got to sell them as if it's for them, knowing full well that it's probably only for a few of the people, because they have to be the specific ICP and they have to be that early adopter, innovator part of that bell curve in crossing the chasm, or else they're not going to be the right fit for your product. And so that was really a good eye opener for me of, I got to get 10 customers, and then I got to find out the ones that love it and double down on them, and then find 10 more like them, instead of I got to find 10 customers and force all 10 of them to love it. I don't have to do that. Just find the people that are early adopters that want this problem solved in this way and want to be at the front of that curve.
Amen. Yeah, Greg has been a great mentor for me. I've really enjoyed his podcast and his content. I'm in one of his peer groups, and so I meet with other entrepreneurs once a month or so, and we talk through some of the stuff. They're at similar stages as me, and it's been really helpful for me. But as far as that goes, Court, like, I couldn't agree more. Everybody wants, it's like, oh, I have my own little SaaS business. I need to be worried about retention and ARR and net revenue retention and all of these different things, right? What's my logo retention rate? What's my renewal rate? The reality is that actually doesn't matter yet. All you really need to do is get a few customers so that you can understand your product better, so you can understand their problem better, so you can look at your product through their eyes. Once if you care enough about these people you're selling to, because you want to be a hero to them, right? If you care that much about them, then you are going to understand if your product is working well. And you'll be able to, through them, you'll understand how your product is solving their problem. And that's the language you use. And that's how you sell your next 10 or 20 customers, right? Because now you are dialing in your ICP that much more.
Justin, I have one more question. Carlos, any more questions from you before we wrap?
Yes. Well, we ask the same questions every time. Kind of similar questions, but moving to a personal side of your personal side, Justin. What is the greatest piece of advice you have ever received? As it can be as a person or as a businessman.
So many good ones. I mean, like how do you pick one? I think I would go, when I was leaving Imagine, I second guessed right at the end because they were trying really hard to keep me and trying to talk me into it. And I called a mentor of mine, Darren Hill, who runs Rev Road. He founded Rev Road, which is kind of an accelerator, and now they've got a VC arm and stuff. And I just called. He was one of the founders of Imagine, and we were talking about it. And I told him, maybe I should just give it a little longer, give him another chance. But in my head, I was like, no, they've already shown me who they are. I need to believe them, right? But he said something that has really resonated with me and has stuck with me, which is, at some point you have to let yourself do what you want to. You have to give yourself permission to do what you want. And that actually resonates with kind of what I had shared with you, Court, about wanting what you want, right? But I think at some point, like, you just have to realize, like, this is your one chance at life. Live it. Go pursue what you want. Go get it. Like, why would you hold back? If this is what you want, like, do it. Give yourself permission. So I love that, Carlos. Thanks.
I love that answer. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I told you I was going to ask you this question, but you're sitting across from your 25-year-old version of yourself. What do you tell yourself?
Yeah, so I got two pieces because one of them is probably less applicable to everybody else, but for my 25-year-old self, it would be really helpful. Is I say, go get your knee fixed. Now. Go do it now. Because I don't know if I have a higher tolerance for pain or whatnot, but like I injured my knee, I think, in middle or high school. I don't even know when I did it. And I never even got it fixed. So I was like 34, because when I was 33, I was like, I'm going to dunk again. So I went through this big old jumping program, all that pounding on my knee. And by the end, my knee was like, no, you are never even jumping again. Thank you very much. So, I mean, I still can do a little bit, but that would have been really helpful to my 25-year-old self. The other piece I'd give, which is probably a little more pertinent, but for other people, is I'd say trust the math. I think that I would do the compounding. I lived in my spreadsheet, right? I was figuring out when I was going to get to my financial independent spot, and there's a great book out there called Your Money or Your Life that talks about the crossover point or something like that, where you now have more investment income than you have expenses or whatnot. But anyway, so I was tracking all of this pretty religiously, but I still, I was in such a hurry to get where I was going. I was a young man in a hurry, and I was just so driven. I mean, I took 21 to 24 credits a semester so I could be done at, from my university, get my economics degree in 5 semesters, from start to finish. But that was because I understood opportunity cost, right? So I was like, get me out of here. But I think the big thing was I don't know if I necessarily was able to relax and just trust the process, know that my investing was going to work, I did enjoy those years, my 20s, because I was married to Rebecca, and she's a hard worker, but she's so good at having fun and like making the most of moments. And, she's just, I am so lucky to be married to her. And so I think that's what I would say is just like enjoy the process, enjoy the journey, trust the math, something along those lines.
Justin, thanks for joining, man. This has been amazing.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope there's some value in this. It's been a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Thank you, Justin.
Loved it. You've been watching Hello Grow, the world's #1 growth podcast. I'm Cortland Brady.
I'm Carlos Souza. If you've watched this video so far, it means that you like the content that we're putting out and the people we're interviewing.
We're putting together a community of business leaders, entrepreneurs, and sales leaders. You liking, subscribing, and sharing this content helps us reach those that are going on that journey.
If you want to be a part of this community, please subscribe, smash that like button, and turn on those notifications.